Hey everybody, this is Ruster Metro Game Core. Today I got a pretty fun project that we're going to do together. You know, the focus of this channel is mostly on cheaper or retro-based handhelds. This idea of recreating those magical moments from our childhood by using more modern software and these new cheaper devices that have been coming out. Now, one of the main questions I get on this channel has to do with setting up devices for somebody else, mostly for people who are not tech savvy. So for example, maybe you've got a child who's not of reading age, but you want to introduce them to the same childhood games that you played as well. Or maybe you've got a sibling or a parent who struggles to change the input setting on the TV. And so you want to make something that's just super plug and play and really easy to use. And I think there are a lot of custom firmwares out there that get the job mostly done. You know, something like a Miu Mini Plus with Onion OS is pretty intuitive. There's also other custom firmwares like MinUI, which really streamline the process, and that's usually my go-to when it comes to giving away one of these devices. However, in this video, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to perfectly curate a handheld that's going to be easy for everybody. Even if you don't know how to read or navigate through a menu, it's going to be completely taken care of, and we're going to do all that work ourselves. So the end stage here is going to be that somebody will get a device, they'll be able to turn it on, and immediately go into a main menu that's only going to have the games on it, and these games are going to be perfectly curated by you, not only from a games list perspective, but then also all of the box art as well. And the interface is going to be super simple. They can jump in and out of their games, they can turn the device off at any time and resume their game when they want, and we're going to do a couple settings tweaks to make sure that they cannot mess it up either. And so the idea here is that we're going to make a handheld that is just as simple to navigate as an old Game Boy. I'm really excited about this one, and I think you're going to like it too. And so without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, as we get started, I want to re-emphasize the fact that this is not the only way that you can share retro games with your loved ones. There are plenty of other options out there that won't be quite as much work as what we're going to do right now, but they won't be as personalized as what we're going to do. And so if you're looking for something that's a lot less work to set up, but still pretty good, then I think that something like Onion OS on the Miu Mini Plus or even Garlic OS on the RG35XX are great choices. These are very intuitive user interfaces. And same thing with MinUI. This one is text-based, so they'll need to know how to read in order to navigate through the menus, but again, it's pretty intuitive and simple to navigate. And so for a lot of these really cheap and simple devices, there are already custom firmware options out there. And to be honest, even using the stock operating system like those that come with some of these more recent Anbernic devices is not half bad either. And we also have some more robust custom firmware options out there like Batocera, as well as Jealous or Rocknix, and ArcOS. In fact, the build that we're using for this project is ArcOS. We're just going to trim it down a bunch. Now, if you're not familiar with ArcOS, this one's been around for a while, about 3 or 4 years at this point. And one of my favorite things about this operating system is that it gives you a lot of freedom for configuration, which obviously is what we're going to do here today. And so the first requirement we have with setting this whole thing up is that you'll need to use a device that is supported by ArcOS. And thankfully there are a ton that are supported today. I think there's about 15 altogether. In fact, just grabbing what I could find in the studio, I found 9 different devices that I had on hand that will work with ArcOS. And so you've got a lot of freedom when it comes to form factor and price point to pick up the device that's going to be a good match for you and whoever you're going to be gifting this to. And chances are, if you've been in this hobby for a while, you might already have one of these devices sitting in a drawer somewhere. And so this might help to breathe life into this device because I really enjoy this user interface myself. Now for this video, I want to focus on 2 specific devices, the Anbernic RG353P and 353PS. And the ironic thing about this is that these are not actually supported by ArcOS, but it just so happens that another image does work with this device. And so just bear in mind that this project that we're doing on these devices is not going to have official support from the ArcOS developer. Now you might be wondering why I prefer these devices for our specific build, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, the Super Nintendo style form factor of this device is really nostalgic. It also has an excellent screen for what we're going to do. It's 3.5 inches with a 4:3 aspect ratio, making it perfect for retro gaming. And so this is a big bonus that we have a nice screen and then also a very Super Nintendo style shape. It also has all the bells and whistles I would want in a retro handheld, including stereo speakers as well as a headphone jack. And then it also has those 2 analog sticks in case you need them. And so it all comes together really nicely. It's got a nice ergonomic grip to it with stacked shoulder buttons, and also I found that any hand size seems to find this very comfortable as well. It also has an HDMI out port on the top, which means that you could plug this into a TV and then play it on the big screen. And there's also something to be said about the quality of the controls with an Anbernic device. The D-pad and the face button buttons have a very classic feel to them, which I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. And finally, the most important part of why I think this device is a great fit is the layout of its function buttons. It's probably the most intuitive layout that we have on any handheld to date. Up top, we have our select and start buttons, and when you press these together while in a game, it's going to close out of the game and then go back to your main menu. In addition, with this setup that we're going to do today, we can also do a quick shutdown. And to do this, you're going to press the F button and then the power button at the same time. This is going to immediately power off your device and save your game if you're in a game at the same time. So if somebody is playing a game, they can press the F button and power to close out of it, and that's also going to save their progress. Now, when they start the game back up by pressing and holding the power button for a couple seconds, it's going to boot back into the operating system, but then also start your game exactly where you were before. Now, admittedly, it does take a little bit of time to get it up and running, about 20 seconds altogether, but I don't think that's half bad. And so I think this will be a great feature for people who just want a plug-and-play experience. And then also ArcOS supports a sleep mode, so if you tap on the power button while in a game, it will also close it down. Just bear in mind that this is only a suspend mode, so it will drain the battery over time. Either way, those are the reasons why we're going to be using this handheld in particular with this video, and it's also why we're going to be using ArcOS so that we can unlock a lot of these features while keeping a very simple interface like you can see here. Now, one thing to bear in mind, this is not going to be the cheapest solution in the world. There are definitely handhelds that you can find that are going to be less expensive. And Anbernic actually has two different models of the RG353P line. The one I recommend is the RG353PS. This one is the cheaper version between the two, and you can usually find it on sale for somewhere around $75 if you look around on AliExpress. This one has three different color options. There's the DMD gray that we'll be using in this video, but they also have a transparent purple and a transparent white option as well. Now, if you really like the look of the North American Super Nintendo version, there's also a model that has that too. And this is actually from an older model that came out about 2 years ago called the RG353P. Now, this one's quite a bit more expensive because it will dual boot into Android and also has an additional gigabyte of RAM. However, we're not going to use either of those features in this video here, and so this is purely a cosmetic decision. So if you do want something that looks more like the North American version, or you want to try out their transparent black version, you'll have to pay a little bit extra for that one. It'll really come down to the taste preferences of whoever it is you're going to be gifting this device to. However, if you're trying to save as much money as possible and you don't really care about the form factor or the coloring, then I would recommend this device instead. This is called the R36S. I've done a video about it previously, but this is the cheapest device you can find today that will run ArcOS. You can generally find this for $40 or cheaper, and you have a couple different color options as well. So what I would recommend doing is checking out the ArcOS website, seeing a list of all the devices that it supports, and then doing your shopping from there. And like I mentioned, if you're already in this hobby, you might already have one of these on hand. Anyway, that's a quick recap of why we're going to be using this device and all of your options surrounding it. Now let's get into the actual meat of the video and set this up. And I do want to note that in addition to this video, I've done a full written guide available on my website. I'll have it linked down below. This will walk you through all the steps that we're talking about here in this video, and I'll also keep updating this website as time goes on. And one other thing of note, in addition to showing you how to do this here, I've also made a pre-built image that I'll have available on the website too. And essentially all I've done here is I've taken a copy of ArcOS using permission from the developer to make my own version that's going to be tailored to everything that we're going to configure here in this video. And so if you don't want to tackle this project from scratch and you want to get halfway there, I will have that link down below as well. And in order to not confuse it with the original ArcOS, I'm calling this one StarkOS. That stands for Simple Tailored ArcOS. And of course, keep in mind this won't have any sort of copyrighted content, so no BIOS files, no games, you still have to do all that setup yourself. However, there are a couple perks with this build, including a custom boot image, which will be the Retro Game Core logo. And you can also set up your own custom boot logo if you would like. I'll have instructions in my written guide. It's a little bit more of an advanced topic. Regardless, my point here is that you've got many ways to set this up. You can watch this video, go through the written guide, or even get a pre-built image. And so now as we get started with the guide, I do want to talk a little bit about SD cards. Most of these devices will come with 2 SD card slots, and the general way of thinking is that you can have a small card and a big card. The small card usually will have the operating system, and then the big card is going to be filled up with like thousands of your favorite games. And that's generally the recommendation that I make anytime that we do a software video, but we're going to do it a little bit different with this one. And that's because we're not going to make a large games list here. After all, we're going to be making something tailored for somebody else. And so we don't want to paralyze them with a bunch of choice by putting hundreds or thousands of games on a device. Instead, we're just going to pare it down to maybe like 20 games altogether. And that's to allow allow them to have a more focused experience overall. And so my recommendation for this video in particular is just to use one single card, and I think that a 16GB card is going to be plenty. This will give you plenty of room to put, 20 or 30 games on it, the perfect amount for a child or somebody else who doesn't want to browse through a million games. In addition, these cards are super cheap. You can always find them for under $10 on Amazon. So that's what I recommend, just a single 16GB card for this very specific setup. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go to the ArcOS website. Again, all this will be linked in the written guide. Once we're there, on the right side, you will see an option that says download links. And here you'll see a list of all the different systems that are supported. Now for this video, we're going to be using the RG353PS. And as a result, we're going to use the RG353M image. And the reasoning here is because the software image between these two is exactly the same. So this is going to work on the device that we're going to use. You can choose to download this either from Google Drive or from Mega. It's all going to be up to you. Either way, just follow those links and then download this SD card image. It's going to be pretty big, about 2.5 or 3 gigabytes altogether. Anyway, once we have that downloaded, we're going to flash it onto that 16GB SD card. And the software that we're going to use for this is called Rufus. Again, all this stuff will be linked in the written guide. Once you have Rufus installed, just go ahead and open it up. And then also insert your 16GB SD card and make sure that it's showing up under the device heading. After that, on the right side, you will see a button that says select, tap on that. And now we need to navigate to wherever it is that we saved that ArcOS image file. And once you've found it, you can click on it and we're ready to start the flashing process. We're going to click on that button that says start here at the bottom. It's going to give you a warning that says, do you really want to do this? And you're going to hit, yeah, man, I want to do it. It's going to take a few minutes to unpack and then write that image, so it's a great time to go grab yourself a drink. And once it's finished, you can now close out of Rufus and then eject the SD card, and we're going to put it into our device. Now, once you turn on the device, it's going to do a couple things in the background with ArcOS, including resizing the partitions and just optimizing everything for you. But once it's done, you will be greeted with the main ArcOS menu. It's usually really dim, so what you can do is press the function button and then up on the D-pad, and that'll increase the brightness. Now, at this point, there are two things that I recommend doing. The first is connecting to Wi-Fi, and then after that, we'll update the operating system. You can find both of these within the options menu. So scroll down to the bottom, you'll see one that says Wi-Fi. Once you're inside here, you want to select the second option. It's going to say connect to a new Wi-Fi connection. And assuming that your device has built-in Wi-Fi, it's going to scan the available networks and then allow you to log in. And I'm going to skip over that part so you don't have to see my credentials, but yeah, now I've connected to my studio Wi-Fi. Once you're done, you can press select and start to exit the Wi-Fi app, and then you can scroll up a little bit to find the update app. And this is kind of self-explanatory, you can just follow the prompts, but at one point it is going to ask you to type out the words OK to make sure that you know that you're going to be updating your device. And once you've done that, it's now going to connect and then update everything. And this might take a while, maybe up to 10 minutes depending on how long it's been since this operating system has been updated. Either way, once it's done, it'll ask you to tap the A button for OK, and then you'll be back in the main menu. Now press the start button, go into the quit menu, and then select shutdown system. Once the device is powered off, we're going to eject the SD card, and now it's time to add our games and BIOS files. And if you've ever set up a retro handheld before, the process is going to be identical to what you're probably used to. So here on the left side, I have my EZROMs partition. This is going to be found within your SD card, and this is where you're going to put all your game files. On the right side, this window is actually my other SD card that is already preloaded with a bunch of games. So all I'm going to do here is move some games from my one SD card over to the other one to populate my new ArcOS build. Before we get to the games, let's do the BIOS files first. These are system files that are necessary for some games to play properly. And so if you've already set up a device before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But one thing of note, these are copyrighted files just like the game files, and so because of that, there aren't going to be any leaks on my website to any of this. But what I can do is share the names of some of these BIOS files so that you can find them yourself. And this list here is the most common BIOS files. So if you look at a system here and that's a system you do want to put on your device, then you can consider putting these BIOS files in there. Now, some of these like Game Boy and Game Boy Color are optional. These are just going to provide the boot logo, like the Game Boy logo, to show before the game starts. But for others like Sega CD and PlayStation 1, yes, you are going to need to find these files and then add them to that BIOS folder. Anyway, once you're done with that, we're ready to start adding our game files to that EZROMs partition. And the process here is pretty simple. You would just find the corresponding folder to whatever system you want to add the games to, and then put your games inside. And I want to emphasize again that less is more with this approach. I would not recommend going over maybe 20 or 30 games altogether. And that's because I think that if you add too many games, it's going to give too much choice, and then whoever is getting this device is not going to know what to focus on. I kind of think of it like how it was back in the day for us, when we only had a couple games to play, but we played the heck out of them. And so we are going to keep this as a very simple and trimmed down games list so that we can focus this entire experience. And so really I'm just doing maybe 3 or 4 games per system as I go along. Anyway, once you're done putting all your games onto the SD card, we can now eject that card and then put it back into our device. And now we're ready to start configuring ArcOS to simplify the entire process. So we'll take this one bite at a time. First thing you want to do is go into the Options menu, and then go into the Advanced folder. The 4th option down is going to say Enable Quick Mode. We want to turn this on. And Quick Mode is the thing that allows us to close out of a game while we're in a game and then boot right back into it. So this is something that we want to have turned on. And so just follow the prompts here, and then once the code is run through the process, we are ready to move on to the next step. Next, we're going to go down to the RetroArch menu just to make a couple quick changes to optimize the experience. First thing, we want to go into the Settings menu and then select Input. Next, scroll down until you find the section that says Confirm Quit. By default, this will be turned on, which means that you have to press Select and Start twice. We're going to turn this off, so you only have to press it one time to exit out of a game. Next, while still in the Input section, we're going to go into the Hotkeys menu. And here there are only 2 things that we need to change because most of them are already pre-configured. The first is we want to go into the Fast Forward Toggle section. And I recommend setting this to the R2 button. This means that when you press Select and R2, it's going to go into Fast Forward. I also recommend scrolling down till you find the section that says Show FPS. This one I like to map to the Y button. And that's really about it when it comes to hotkeys. Again, we want to keep this as simple as possible. And here's a quick diagram of what it's going to look like once we've configured those 2 hotkeys which are in green. So essentially we will press the Select button and then the other button to actually make the hotkey. So Select and Start will close the game, and then also Select and R1 will save a state, Select and L1 will load a state, and Select and B will restart the game if we want. And none of these hotkeys are really necessary, but if somebody wants to have these available, it's always nice to have them on. Anyway, once that's done, we're going to back out to the main settings menu, and then I recommend going into the saving menu. And here you just want to confirm that auto save state and auto load state are already turned on. That means it's going to save the game and load it right back up anytime you start and stop a game. From there, we only have one other option to change. It's going to be up in the settings menu under user interface and then on-screen notifications. From there, go into notification visibility and then scroll down until you find the thing that says save state notifications. By default, this will be turned on. I recommend turning this off. That means that when you start up a game, it's not going to let you know that a save state was loaded. And that's it. Those are the only RetroArch configurations that we need to do. It's super simple. So go back to the main menu, then configuration file, save current configuration. And now everything is saved. However, in the RetroArch menu, you can see that there are 2 different RetroArch versions. The main one is just called RetroArch, that's the 64-bit version, but there's also one called RetroArch 32. This is the 32-bit version of RetroArch, which plays PlayStation 1 games better. And so I do recommend going through and making all those same adjustments that we just did, but with the 32-bit version of RetroArch. And so I'm not going to bore you by going through all those settings again, but it's going to be the exact same stuff that we did. We're going to change out a couple of those hotkeys and then also turn off those on-screen notifications. Anyway, once we're done with those configurations, we're ready to start making the user interface look a lot better. And the first thing we want to do is scrape box art. Now, we're not actually going to use the box art that we scrape, but scraping it does one of 2 things. Number 1, it creates the image files that we're going to need to replace here in a minute, and then it's also going to generate an XML file, which is going to allow the operating system to find those image files as well. So it is a little bit of work to get this set up in the first place, but it's going to be well worth it. Anyway, let's go ahead and start the scraping process. We're going to press Start and then go into the Scraper menu. Here we don't really need to change any settings, but you can change the image source to Box2D. That's my favorite to use. And then you will also need to use your screenscraper.fr username and password. If you don't have one of these set up already, you just need to go to the Screenscraper website and then register. It's free to do all this. And then once you have your username and password, you need to go back into ArcOS and then enter those same credentials right here. Once that's done, you can go into Scrape Now, and then again, you don't really have to mess with any of these options, just select Start. Now it's going to read through all of the games that you put on there previously and then add the box art for them. And this is another reason why less is more with this approach, because you don't have to wait for a bunch of games to scan and download. You can keep it to like 30 or 40 or whatever it's going to be. So chances are it'll only take a few minutes to scrape through all of these, and then once it's done, we are ready to now turn off the system again and then eject the SD card and put it back into our computer for the last time. Now what we're going to do is replace all of those image files with something that's more uniform, but then also we can choose whatever box art we would like. And the reason why we want these to be uniform is because generally when you download the box art, they're going to be of various different shapes and sizes. And that's to mimic the original box art from back in the day. You know, the Game Boy was a square, but then NES was tall, and then Super Nintendo was long. So this just kind of unifies everything together, and we're going to use a special database called SteamGridDB. And so here's what the process is going to look like. On the left side, we have our SD card that has all of our games and box art inside. And then on the right side, I have a web browser going to steamgriddb.com. And so now I'm going to walk you through the process of replacing all of these images. We're going to start with Game Boy Advance as our example. If we open up that folder, you can see that I've added 3 different games. In addition, because I've already run the scraper tool, you can see there's a new folder inside that says images. And inside there are the image files that we want to replace here in a moment. So we're going to do this one game at a time. We'll start with Metroid Zero Mission. Over in our browser, we're going to search for the words Metroid Zero Mission, and then we will pick the game. Once the game pops up, I like to click on the word Top Grids, which is going to show all the different box art that we can choose. And you'll have a bunch of choices here, including official box art, with or without text, and then also fan art too. So this is where you can customize the whole experience. You can find something that best matches the person that you're going to be giving it to, and then you can choose that image. In this example, I'm thinking of giving this to a child, and so as a result, I want to keep the official box art so they can recognize it later in life. And so I'm just going to pick the standard Metroid Zero Mission art. After you click on it, it's going to give you a download button. And once you click on that, it's going to open up a new tab with that box art. Now right click on it and then select Save Image As. It's going to open up a window here, and now you're going to want to navigate to your EZROMs partition and then find your Game Boy Advance folder. Once you're there, open up the image folder and you will find one that says Metroid Zero Mission-image. And that's the one that we want to replace with this new image that we just downloaded. It'll give you a prompt that says, are you sure you want to replace it? And you know what to do. And that's it. We have now updated the box art for Metroid Zero Mission. And from there, it's a rinse and repeat process for all the other games that you have installed on your SD card. Just bear in mind that when using the SteamGrid database, it might not be super intuitive. For example, when searching for Pokemon Emerald, it brings up a bunch of different options because there are like a bunch of ROM hacks and things like that that are also listed here. And so you may have to scroll through until you find the actual game that you want to use, which is going to be Pokemon Emerald version here in this example. And from there, we'll have a bunch of different art to choose from, and this time around, I'm going to choose fan art instead of the official one. And it's the same process here. We will download the image, right-click on it, save image as, and then replace the original Pokemon Emerald version that we already have in here. And that, in a nutshell, is how you go through this process. You will find every game on the left side, and then find the image for it on the right side. And it is a bit of a mundane process, but it's totally worth it once you have everything set up. And to be honest, this is one of my favorite parts of this entire setup. Number one, I really liked picking the game specifically for that person, but then I also like picking the box art as well. The way I like to think about it, say you're making a handheld for your dad, and he doesn't really know how to get through any of these systems, but he did like to play like NES back in the day, or maybe some old arcade games. And what I like to do is imagine all the cool things that my dad has done for me over the years, and how cool it would be if he's able to turn on this device and see all those games all at once. And so that's the sort of motivation that I used when I was going through this rather mundane task of downloading all this box art. And of course, you can always enhance that experience by maybe cracking open your favorite beer or maybe watching a video on the side. Either way, yes, it might take some time to get this set up, but I think it's worth it for a job well done. And one last thing of note, make sure that when you're downloading the image, it's in PNG format and not JPEG. That's going to mess up your configuration. Either way, once you're all set up with that, you can now eject the SD card and then put it back into your device for one final time. And as we navigate through the games list, you will see that we have all these box arts that are the exact same shape and size. And now we're ready for the final step, which is to configure everything to look like how it did in the intro of this video. The first thing we want to do is go through our games list and pick the ones that we want to see in that main screen. Once you've decided on the games that you want to use, press the Y button to set them as a favorite. And you'll have to do these one at a time. And one thing to bear in mind is maybe at this point you've decided that maybe certain games aren't going to show up in that main menu. That's great, just don't toggle them as a favorite. And you could also always add them later if you would like. So for example, you could put Sonic 1 on there, but maybe you want to add Sonic 2 and 3 later on after they finish the first one. Either way, once you've gone through and selected all of your favorites, if you go into the favorites menu, you will now see the full games list. I ended up putting 36 games altogether in this particular games list. I think that's a pretty good number overall. Now we're ready to change out our theme and start tweaking it. So press the start button and then go into the UI settings. Then under theme, find the one that says ES theme switch. Once you've selected that, we're going to scroll through the rest of the UI settings. The first thing we want to change is the transition style. Change this to slide. Next, under Start on System, change this to Favorites. This means when you start up the game, it's going to go directly to the favorites list. Next, under Boot on Games list, we're going to select Yes. That means it's going to go directly into the favorites folder. Next, under Hide System View, we're going to leave this off for now. We are going to turn this on later. And after that, we only have two other options to change. We want to turn off the Enable Filters and then also turn off the Show Kodi in Start menu. Once you've made those changes, press the B button to back out of the UI settings. That's going to change out the theme to the one that we picked. And once it's changed out the theme, we need to go back into the UI settings, but now we're going to go into theme configuration. And first thing we want to change under Games List View Style, change this to Grid. And then finally scroll all the way down to the bottom, and under Force Uppercase, we want to turn this on to No. And those are the only theme configurations we need to do for now. So if we back into the main menu and then go into the favorites list, you will now see that it looks exactly like how it was during the intro, that we can scroll through all these games, and because we use that Steam Grid database, they're all of the same size. And this gives us that beautiful uniform appearance that we were looking for. In addition, we've got all the box art that we've already curated ourselves, and so it just looks really nice. And once we're happy with how this looks, we're ready to start cleaning this up to make everything intuitive. First thing we want to do is go back into the settings and then go into emulator settings. And here what we want to do is make sure that all of our emulators are set to run with RetroArch as the primary emulator. The best example is going to be Nintendo 64 because this one by default uses a standalone emulator. And this one won't work with the quick mode that we're going to rely on, and so you do need to change this over to RetroArch. And so that's the first configuration we want to do. The next thing we want to do is turn off the Wi-Fi. Now, of course, if you wanted to set up retro achievements and keep the Wi-Fi on, you could totally do that. But because I assume we're going to be giving this to a child or somebody who doesn't care about that stuff, we're going to turn Wi-Fi off altogether to save on battery life. So we're going to go into the Options menu, find the Wi-Fi section, and then open that up. Within there, we're going to pick the fourth option, which says Delete Existing Connections. From there, find the Wi-Fi, press the A button, and then it'll delete it. And once that's done, you can go up to that first option, which says Turn Wi-Fi Off. I would also turn it off altogether. From there, you can exit out of the Wi-Fi options, and then also go back into the main menu. And for this last step, you're going to need to go into the Favorites menu first. Once you're inside this menu, then press the Start button. And now under UI Settings, scroll down until we find the thing that says Hide System View. Now is the time that we can actually turn this on. And once we turn that on, if we back out into the main menu, you can see that we're in the Favorites menu, but if we press the B button, we can no longer get to the other systems. And so that's going to clean up the navigation experience a bunch. However, there are still some things that the user could do. For example, if they press the Y button, it would remove a game from favorites. So we want to disable that as well. And the easiest way to do that is to change the UI mode. So we're going to go back to the main menu, then UI Settings, and we're going to change the UI mode from Full to Kid. And once you choose that, it's going to give you a warning. It says, hey, this is a restricted mode. If you want to get back into it, you have to use the Konami code. It's going to ask, do you want to proceed? And we're going to click, yeah, man, I want to do it. And now once we go back into the main menu, all the other buttons are going to be disabled. This means if we press the Start button, it's not going to bring up a menu. Same thing with the Y button, it's not going to remove the game from your favorites. And so this will make the experience foolproof for children as well as adult children. Now, if you ever need to get back into the main menu, you can always do that. All you have to do is do the Konami code, up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A. And from there, you're back into the main menu and you can make all the other configurations that you need to. And that's really the crux of this setup. We want to make sure that we have this theme set up with all of our favorites lists, and then we put it into kid mode so they can't mess anything up. However, of note, because you don't have access to the menu, there are a couple hotkeys that are pretty important. For example, you can adjust the brightness by pressing the F button and then up and down on the D-pad. Either way, at this point, we are mostly set up. So what'll happen if somebody has this console, what they can do is they press the A button to launch up a game, and then once they're in the game, they can just play it like they would. Now, when they're done playing it, they can press Select and Start. It'll boot them back to that main menu. And because we have autosave and auto load turned on, when they start up the game again, it's going to take them right back to where they were. Now, one thing, if they ever want to reset the console, they can always do that by pressing Select and B. And so there are a couple things that they can do while in a game, which will help if they know those hotkeys. Now, in addition, because we have quick mode enabled, if they press the F and power button while in a game, it's going to close out of that game. And then same thing, if we start up the device, it's going to go right back to where they were within the game as well. And I think that's going to be a really handy feature to enhance the plug and play experience of our new handheld. Now, before we wrap up, there are a couple more advanced things you could do to really enhance the experience for them as well. For example, when you start up a Game Boy game, it's going to be just in your default black and white color theme. But if you want to change the colorization for them, it's very easy to do. So you would press Select and X to bring up the RetroArch Quick menu, and then navigate down to the section that says Core Options. Here, change the Game Boy colorization to internal. And then below that is the internal palettes, and you can change that to whatever you want. We're just going to keep the standard DMG. After that, I would recommend going down to Interframe Blending and change this to LCD Ghosting Accurate. And that's it. You can now go back into the game. It's going to auto-save all of those options, and now you have a nice green look. And if you wanted to go one step further, you could apply a shader. For example, here, let's go back into the RetroArch Quick menu. And now at the bottom, we're going to go into Shaders and then Load Preset. From there, select the Shaders GLSL option and then scroll through till you find the Handheld section. Within there, if you toggle down, you'll find LCD3X. Choose that one. And then I recommend also going down to the shader parameters and change the Brighten LCD to 8.0. This will make the screen not so dim as you're playing it. Once that's done, go into Save Preset and then select Save Core Preset. And from there, you will now have an LCD shader for both Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. And you could also do the same thing for like Game Gear and Game Boy Advance, whatever you would like. Now, another thing I recommend doing is using an interpolation shader for Nintendo and Super Nintendo to help balance the pixels. What you want to do here is start up one of those games from those systems, then go into Shaders, and then again Load Preset, and then Shaders GLSL, and then scroll down to Interpolation, and then select Sharp Bilinear 2x Prescale. And this is a nice shader that will give you both better pixel balance, but then also not make the screen too fuzzy either. Once you've selected that, go into Save Preset, and then select either Save Core Preset or Save Content Directory Preset. It doesn't really matter. And that's it. Now every NES game is going to have balanced pixels, and you can do the same thing with Super Nintendo as well. And really, that's about it for this video, and congratulations for getting through all of this. I know it was a little bit complex, and some might say it's a little bit nitpicky, but I think that the end result is well worth it. I've already started to think about different ways that I could make handhelds to give to certain people. For example, my brother who grew up playing NES with me, he would love to have some of our old favorites on a handheld like this. And he's also one of those people who doesn't really know how to use electronics, so I think it might be a great fit for him as well. And when it comes down to it, I think this is one of the best ways to share this hobby. Because honestly, even though it's cool that there are hundreds of thousands of people who watch my videos, I know there are millions of other people out there who would love to play these games as well, they just don't know where to start. And so this is a great way to take all that knowledge that you might have and then share it with others without requiring them to basically learn a PhD in retro gaming. I like to think of it like myself when I was maybe 10 or 12 years old. If somebody handed me one of these devices, sure, I would love tinkering around with it, but I think it would have been even more special if somebody had curated it with a bunch of box art and games that they knew I would love. And so I think this is another way of sharing your love of retro games with the people that are in your life. And I know that in all my videos I ask you to leave a comment and telling me something one way or another, but I think today it's a little bit more special. This time I'd love for you to leave me a comment about which device you think is going to be the best fit for a setup like this, but then also tell me who it is that you think would be a good recipient for something like this as well. Is it going to be one of your parents, or maybe a sibling, or maybe the best man at your wedding, or maybe one of your kids? In addition, I'd love for you to tell me what one game is a must-have for that person as well. Is it going to be something like Ninja Turtles Arcade, or maybe Mario World, Mario 64, something along those lines? For me, I think the best fit is actually going to be Quackshot for the Sega Genesis. This was a really special one for me, and I think that my kids would love it. And then again, as one final reminder, there is a written guide linked down below, including a pre-configured image that'll do about half of this legwork for you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.